All right, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Stephanie Ramos. I am the event manager here at Internet Creations. I am super excited to be with you all this afternoon here in New Jersey. Maybe it's morning time where you're at. This webinar is called The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up in Salesforce. So we figured it's end of April, spring cleaning is well on its way. So we wanted to offer you some tips and tricks for decluttering in Salesforce Service Cloud. So it's not just spring cleaning for your home, but spring cleaning for your Salesforce org as well. Now, as we get started, I wanted to introduce you to your hosts with the most for this afternoon. First up, Jeremy Krebs. He is the Salesforce consultant here at Internet Creations and all-around funny man. He does it. Fun fact about him, he is super into improv comedy. So welcome, Jeremy, to today's webinar. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie. I'm excited to be here and go over all the awesome stuff that we're going to do to help clean up your org.
And sitting to my left right now, I have our manager of professional services and super fast man, Superman marathon runner. He's laughing right now as I introduce him, Mark Budson. He's actually running the New Jersey half marathon. Full marathon on Sunday. So everybody wish him some good luck because that is no easy feat. Welcome, Mark.
There's not much to say after that intro. Thanks, Stephanie. I'm not so sure about the super part. I'm not the world's fastest runner, but thank you very much. And I'm really excited to be here. And I'm looking forward to chatting about how to clean up your org.
All right,
Good luck,
so
Mark.
let's get into it. We'll take over, just go over some quick agenda items. How to ask questions. Some of you already know how to do that because I saw you guys asking questions already in the chat box. But probably over to the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the little questions box in the control panel. So you can go ahead, ask your questions. We'll be answering them throughout the webinar. So get to it. First question up is, where are you calling from? So like you probably deduced, Mark and I are hanging out here in our New Jersey office, which is located in Hamilton, New Jersey. If you're not familiar with the area, it's close to Princeton, close to Trenton, right smack dab in the center of the state. And Jeremy is hanging out a little bit out west, hanging out at our Dallas, Texas office. So I think it's a little bit warmer out there for you, Jeremy. What's the weather like there for you?
It is nice and warm here. I think it's like 73 right now. And then, so it's pretty great day right now. That'll last like 3 weeks here though, and then it'll be 100.
I'm looking forward to that because that's kind of like my favorite time of the year. So I see people are responding in the question. We have people coming to us from Louisville, Kentucky. We have people coming to us from Iowa. That's pretty cool. We have some West Coasters here, Boston, Massachusetts. Whoa, what? Boston, Massachusetts. Ate my words right there. Tucson, Arizona. So I think it's still morning for you over there, Arizona, right? Plano, Texas. Plano.
Texas.
Basically Dallas. That's what Benjamin says. Utah's in the house, so that's really cool. Thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon / morning, wherever you are. We're really excited for today's webinar. So Mark, without further ado, please take it away for us.
Thanks for getting us all pumped up there, Stephanie. That was awesome. All right, so let's dive in here. So we're going to cover a couple of things here. First thing we're going to talk about is we all here on the call to talk about cleaning up, but let's talk about a little bit, why do we need to clean up? And part of that mission or that objective is actually understanding what matters versus what's just noise. So we'll talk about some approaches and some tools you can use to help do that. Once you understand what the difference and what matters and what's just noise, what are some of the best practices and things you can do for cleaning up? This is not comprehensive, but we do go over a number of best practices. And finally, we'll be able to reap the benefits of that by seeing a dashboard that sparks some joy. So first I'm going to dive into, what does your messy org say about your data? Jeremy, what do you think? What do you say about that?
Well, Mark, a messy org really tells you a lot of nothing, right? I think one of the reasons everyone uses Salesforce is to get valuable information that's useful. So in this demo, you're going to see the Spark Joy company, which is an imaginary company based on real life experiences. They sell cleaning robots, and they've recently gone through some management changes, implement changes, new policy stuff, right? So we're going to just kind of go through that demo and what we've done to take a messy org, some real life examples and some stuff we see all the time, changed it, and show you what you can get once you make those changes, right? Some of the things that we've seen is hitting field limits on objects, right? So if you look here, Mark's brought up the dashboard. So this is an actual dashboard I saw in a company. This guy is a replacements parts manager for the company. His job is to track to see how many replacement parts are going out for the robots and see if there's any kind of trends or any important information you can see. Well, right now you can see we have replacement part 1 cent, replacement part 2 cent. A little further down is replacement part 3 cent. If I'm the manager and I'm looking at this dashboard, like I can't, this doesn't help me. It's cluttered, it's messy. I'm just going to export this stuff to Excel and use Excel magic to get the information I need, which I think everyone has had someone in their organization that does that. You can also see this error code by account, right? You can see that there's duplicates, there's information missing. This isn't helpful, right? And this is a lot to do with just how the data is structured and just not keeping up with making sure that everything's relative. And we're going to go through how to fix that all up for everybody.
So I want to kind of go back to you said about the data structure. So one of the contributing factors you think to that poor dashboard is how the database was designed?
Yeah, a lot of times people will just throw some fields up in Salesforce because it's super easy. That's one of the great things about it, but not really thinking about A, long-term, how's this going to be used, and B, am I going to be able to get the reports I need, right? In this example, you saw replacement part 1, 2, and 3. Literally, someone had that on their cases to keep track of replacement parts sent out. Never thought that there could be more than 3, or that you would need to keep track of how many times a part was sent out, right? So that's really difficult to report on and get good data on.
That makes sense. Okay, so let's start talking about how do you figure out what matters versus what doesn't matter.
Well, let's go ahead and go into that. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Mark, and we can go. There's 2 paths you really want to go through, right? Step 1 is you want to talk to your stakeholders. You need to understand what they need what information they need to run their business, whatever that is. Different companies are going to have different things. I like to ask people is what information do you need to make decisions that matter in your department, right? It's a really great place to start. It's going to let you know what stuff matters. It's also going to help you kind of figure out what reports they need to run their department so you can figure out a good solution design. The second thing you want to do is you want to use some tools to do some analysis, right? To help see what information does matter. Here at Internet Creations, we do cases, right? I think everyone has service centers that do cases. So some of the things that we really use to help get important information, right, is case flags. We use that as a product we have, and that's going to let you know, if you break any SLAs, it's going to help you keep track of that, right? That's real important information. That's really good to do. Due dates, follow-up dates, subject lines really matter in Service Cloud. Like all these are really important key fields that your stakeholders will let you know that they need clean and that need to be set up properly, right? And then just making sure that your data is normalized across your org, right? That everything matches up and that it's clean.
So that's talking to the stakeholders. So that's one of the approaches you could take. So what's the second approach you could take to deciding what matters? What's noise versus what's important?
Well, like we said, it's really easy to add fields to Salesforce. So there's actually some tools out there that are going to help you look at all those fields and see if they're actually being used or not. And we're going to go ahead and show those here in a second.
All right. So let's talk about that. So let's talk about these tools that you just mentioned a second ago.
So these are the 2 tools that we see used fairly a lot. And field trips is one of them. It's a free tool you can get off the AppExchange. What it's going to do is it's going to look at your org and what objects you tell it to and say, hey, here are the fields that you have, and this is how often they're filled out with all the records that you have in your org, right? So, for example, you can have 50,000 records and have a field that's filled out 0.001%, right? So that's probably a pretty glaring, thing that's telling you, hey, this field's probably not being used. You can probably get rid of it, right? So that's a really good place to start your spring cleaning, is identifying those fields and then doing some more digging into them, right? Field print is the same kind of thing as field trips, but it's for Salesforce and built by them. It has some additional functionality. As you can see, if you have Enterprise Edition and up, you can use that. But these are great places to start your spring cleaning.
One of the things I'd like to understand before we move forward is, why do we need to clean in the first place? I mean, everyone gets it fundamentally, I think, at a high level, but what's the real reasons you'd want to clean your org up, get rid of fields and so forth? What's driving that?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, Mark. Really, two things. I don't know if anybody's ever hit it, but objects have field limits on them. The case object has a field limit of 500. Activities and tasks only have 100. And if you're a bigger organization or organization that's been around a long time, you can hit those limits. And then once you do, it's really kind of hard to go back and try to clean all this stuff all at once so that you can implement a new process. So it's really good to keep track of that. Also, if you've ever tried to build a report with an object that has a whole bunch of fields that no one uses, it takes forever to find what you need, right? Making reports becomes so much more difficult. So you just really want to keep on top of this just for those two reasons alone.
That makes sense. Okay. So now let's say we ran these tools and we have some data. We talk to the different decision makers and collaborators and managers and so forth. And what's the next step? Once you have all that information, what's the next step in figuring out how to keep things tidy?
So after you talk to all your stakeholders, you're going to either have a choice to make, right, based on what they've told you, either to deprecate the field or delete it. And if you look here on the slide, we have some definition of what those mean. Deprecated basically means I need to keep this in my org, but I need to make sure no one else uses it. It's read only. It's for historical things, or maybe some old process that we're firing for legacy stuff. Deletion is I don't need this information anymore. It's stored in some other system, or it's just not relevant anymore. It was tied to an old process that we retired, something like that, right? It's just basically clutter or noise in my org now.
Is it possible for something to be deprecated to eventually be deleted too?
All the time, Mark. All the time. You'll deprecate something and eventually you'll continually to check on that stuff and eventually just delete it whenever you can.
All right. So obviously there's a pretty important decision you have to make here. So can you walk us through what the decision criteria or questions you would ask to make that determination?
Yeah. So if you look here, there's just some questions you want to ask yourself if you're going to deprecate or delete. Is there data? In the first example we did is we ran field trips. I have 50,000 records and 2 of them have data in it, right? Probably don't need this field. It may have been just some process someone was testing or something like that in production. I can wipe this out, right? Sometimes you look at a field and is the data even relevant anymore? Maybe the data refers to an old product that you no longer sold, you haven't sold for 5 years, and that's all it's for. You can probably delete that, or at least deprecate it out. Is there any kind of process tied to this field? I think one of the big things a lot of people do is we use checkboxes to keep track of email alerts that have been sent out, right, on an object. Does that process even run anymore? Maybe it's been deactivated for 6 months. Do I even need that checkbox anymore, right? Is there a similar field? I don't know how many times we've looked at, especially like the case object, and especially if you have lots of different departments using it, they'll have very similar fields with very similar pick list values. There might be 1 or 2 different and everything else is the same. So can I combine that stuff together, right? But you also, is there a legal requirement for it, right? On contacts, you have the email opt-out. is there GDPR requirements now, right? That's a field that is required by legal, but may not be filled out very much. So you need to make sure you know what those fields are and you keep track of them. We also have retention policy. I mean, does your company have a data retention policy that says, hey, we keep everything for 5 years, no matter what? We're in the health industry. HIPAA requires this. You can't delete any of this stuff. Doesn't matter. We have to keep it, right? So how are you going to deal with that? And then, is the data backed up, right? Always want to have data backed up. It's real important. It's so much easier to restore data than to try to figure out how to recreate it once it's gone.
And thinking about the dashboard you showed us a few moments ago and looking at, is there similar fields? That also makes it pretty obvious that replacement parts, which was simply a field to capture a part, 3 different fields though, that would be a good candidate then, right? To replace.
I'm glad you saw that, Mark. Yes, that is a perfect field to replace, right? It's just duplicate information that is the same. So we would definitely want to consolidate that.
Right, because it obviously made it really difficult to report on.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we've made a decisions now to deprecate or delete. So let's talk about how to deprecate something.
So how to deprecate something's pretty easy. First thing you want to do is you want to send out an email to the stakeholders or anybody who would be affected, say, I'm going to plan on deprecating this field. Do you use this for anything, or is there a reason I can't do this? You may tell them what deprecation means. You're just going to make it read only. And sometimes we'll get responses back saying, hey, no, you can't do that. I use it for XYZ. Or a lot of times you won't hear anything because people get busy. They plan on responding to you, but stuff comes up and it's been a couple of days, and before you know it, 2 weeks have passed. The general rule of thumb before you do any of this stuff is to wait at least 2 weeks from your initial communication before you actually take an action. That just gives people time to respond. The bigger the organization, the more time you may want to give. It's really up to you, but a minimum of 2 weeks is a really good rule of thumb. So 2 weeks have passed, you haven't heard anything. What you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and mark the field read only, send another email, say, hey, I made this read only, and see if anyone says anything, right? Or if anything breaks, right? So if you didn't get any information from anybody or no one's, screamed at you for changing it, next thing you're going to do is you're going to relabel the field, right? And one of the things I like to do is I like to put a bunch of X's in front of it, just because it pulls it down to the bottom of the screen for me for fields. I know that stuff's all deprecated. It's real easy to find. It's also an attention grabber for anybody who looks at it. They may notice it and they may ask me so that I know, hey, this person does use this. The real important though, once you decide whatever that's gonna be, that prefix, you keep it consistent for deprecation. So it's always XXX, right? You don't wanna start mixing stuff or changing it. So just make sure you keep it consistent, right? Because that's gonna help you find those fields later on if you ever want to delete them, and it also just keeps them in one place. It's real easy to find them.
Great, that made total sense. We had a question come on that are we going to see any samples. We're going to actually show a case, a cleanup dashboard that some of these best practices are applied to towards the end of the session. So Jeremy, let's move on to deleting. I know deleting is a bit more of an involved process. Can you walk us through how that'll work?
Yeah, so you do want to take a little bit more time deleting because you are removing it. We're not just making it read only. And like Mark said in the beginning, you can have a deprecated field that you can delete eventually. So the first thing you want to do is you're going to try to review the field. You're going to see if you can figure out where it's used. Some cool things that Salesforce is doing in Pilot that we'll show a little bit later is they have a where is this used button. There are some limitations, but they'll give you a good idea. Or a trick to use is you can always go into a sandbox and then try to delete a field and see if Salesforce screams at you. It's a really good, fast way to find out if the field is being used on any kind of automation or anything. It's going to say you can't delete it. Here's the stuff that's being used by, right? So go ahead and review it, send an email out to your stakeholders or people you think are using those certain fields and say, hey, is anybody using this? I'm looking to delete it, right? So what you're gonna do is you're gonna go ahead and do the same thing we do with deprecation. We're gonna go ahead and wait 2 weeks, see if anybody says anything. If we don't hear anything, we're going to go ahead and relabel this field for deletion, right? This is going to be a different prefix than your deprecation one. So you could use all Z's, which is a good one, or, you know, in the example, you could put DEL underscore. But you're just changing the label. You're not changing the API name. And what this is going to do is an attention grabber. If someone does use this and all of a sudden the reports show, you know, a weird label, or, you know, that they're going to contact you and they say, hey, why is this changed, right? Once you do that, you're going to go ahead and wait 2 weeks. The bare minimum, like I said, you can do longer, but 2 weeks is a good rule of thumb, bare minimum. And then you're going to hide it. You're going to go ahead and remove it from the page layout. See if anybody noticed again, right? And if no one notices and no one says anything, great. It's been 2 weeks. I'm good to go. So the last part is you're going to go ahead and make the field read only for everybody, including admins, right? And the reason you're going to do this is you want to see if any processes break, right, that you're not aware of. Maybe there's some integration that show up in the beta thing that you looked at or you just weren't aware of. So you want to see this. And also, if you're in a bigger organization, there's some times where there's things that maybe run once a quarter or once a year. So this is maybe where you want to give it a little bit more time before you go to the next step of actually deleting. You know, I'm marking all this stuff read only and I'm going to leave it this way for an entire quarter just to see what happens, right? If you kept up with keeping your fields clean, this won't be a big deal. So you've waited a quarter, no one said anything, nothing's broken, everything looks good. Last thing you're going to do is you're going to back up the data. I like to use Salesforce Export because it's easy. You don't have to worry about any kind of weird security stuff. It's going to pull everything for that object along with that field and the ID. You can also use third-party tools like OwnBackup. That's really, really good. You can also, if you really, really want to, you can build a report and you can just pull out that field, but you also have to make sure you pull out the ID of the record because you're going to need that if you ever have to do a restore. But I really suggest using a third-party tool to get that information. So once you have it, you have your backup, you're confident, you go ahead and just delete the field. And that's it. You've now just, you know, decluttered your org a little bit.
Now we're assuming if users are doing best practice of after any integrations, those integrations have their own permissions, right? Because otherwise they could fail if they may not fail right away if the admin has still access. Is that the right way of thinking about it?
That's correct. That's why you make it read only for everything, right? Because a lot of times integration users will have an admin account, and that's not great. You want to have integration users use Salesforce API user profile. So it's real important that you make it read only for everybody, including system admins.
Makes sense. And I just want to go back to the wait again, just making sure. So you're suggesting or recommending as the best practice that between these stages, you wait no less than 2 weeks. You actually recommend, I guess for a certain size of orgs, it could change, but generally speaking, no less than 2 weeks between steps. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a real safe rule of thumb. Obviously, you know, smaller orgs, you're going to be more intimate in knowledge with what's going on. And bigger orgs, you know, more moving parts, more complex, right? So, you know, make a best judgment call, but 2 weeks minimum, right? And maybe even longer before you actually delete it. Like, I don't think there's a problem with waiting a quarter to delete something out. You have it marked, you know it's there. You can put in the description field, hey, check this now. And then you can just, hey, I'm deleting this because it's been a quarter and nothing's happened.
This process seems kind of complicated to delete something. I mean, all these steps you have to follow. Is this really stems from the Salesforce's tendency to make it so easy to add stuff that's not always well tracked? I mean, am I missing something here?
No, that's exactly why we do it this way, Mark. Is a lot of times because it's so easy to add a field, and a lot of places have really lax change management, and you know things get busy. You may not actually know exactly what everything does, right? Salesforce orgs change a lot. They change fast. That's one of the great things about them. That's also one of the bad things about them. You have to be real careful when you're taking things away because it's really hard to put it back. It's a huge headache. And it's just kind of like that double-edged sword, right? If you want to be able to change things really, really fast, you also have to be kind of really careful when you're taking things out, right?
That makes sense. So actually, you actually alluded to earlier in this conversation about a new Salesforce tool to help you understand where something is actually being used. So want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so this is from our org. I think everyone should have access to this in their sandbox. And basically what it does is you just click a button that says where's this used, and I'll show you this little report here. You can see our field, hours remaining. It's used in a lot of places. This would be really, really hard to deprecate or remove. And we probably wouldn't even want to because we use it in so many places, right? It's on page layouts, it's a field set. We have some Apex using it. It leverages a new API, but there are some limitations to it. I don't think it picks up all kinds of code relations. So there could be code that it's being used and that's not showing up here. But it's a good place to start.
All right. So we talked about field usage. What other kind of cleanup you can do? What other magic?
So one of the other things that we see a lot is pick list. Pick lists tend to be used a lot in orgs for really important information, but they aren't maintained very well. They have old values in them. They get super big and people start just picking stuff because they don't want to dig through the pick list. So there's two ways to do that. You can deactivate a value or replace it, right? And that's really cool. And it's kind of, you can think of it kind of the same way you do a field with a pick list value. I'm going to deactivate this value and see if anything bad happens, right? And usually either someone will say, hey, I need this value, or, why isn't this here? And then if you ever need to replace a value, this value is now going to be this value. That's real easy. A lot of times that happens and people just add the value, they don't actually replace it. The things you want to think about when replacing a value is, do I need to keep the old data, right? Because you don't want to replace it if you have to keep the old data's value, you want to deactivate. But if you want to replace everything, it's awesome. This is so great to use, right? A lot of people will just delete it and then add a new one and do an update. So the other thing is you can start saying the dashboard, just poor design, right? Poor data structure, not thinking about what it is that you need to, information you need to get. A lot of people just real fast will throw up some pick list values on a case object and say, hey, we can track this stuff now. Here we go. I've seen opportunities that have pick list value product 1 through 5 to keep track of what products are being sold in opportunity, right? Or what products an account owned. So that seems to be like a running theme in a lot of orgs.
Yeah, what you just described seems very limiting if the organization grows or changes.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
I think everyone here can say that business changes really fast and changes a lot.
Great. Okay, so we've gone through all these steps to make our org nice and tidy and more efficient. But obviously, it sounds like, because Salesforce makes it so easy to add stuff and change and respond to business requirements, how do you keep things tidy in the future?
Well, Mark, I mean, you can think of Salesforce just like your house, right? You have to clean your house regularly. You have to clean your car regularly. You need to clean your Salesforce org regularly. So what we suggest to do are some key points here, right? Set a thing up to run the field trips every quarter, right? To see what's new, to follow up on deprecated fields, to see if they can be deleted. Run that every quarter and just go through the process again. Document fields and processes in the description field. That's really nice. This checkbox is used by this workflow, right? So that way you know exactly what it's used for. You don't have to go through the process of trying to delete it to figure it out. Always work with your stakeholders, right? Because their needs are going to change, right? And you need to understand what that's going to be so that you can build the best solution, right? This is where you're going to find out, hey, maybe I can repurpose this field, or maybe we don't need this field anymore because this process has been retired. I can start the deprecation process, right? You can kind of get a little bit ahead of the curve there. And be an awesome admin. Balance the pros and cons of all your decisions. What are you gonna change? How's that gonna affect the org? One of the things I always ask myself, and I like to have the stakeholders, like, do we really need this field? What are we tracking? What does this field do? Like, what value in this field is gonna make you do this action? Like, why are you watching this? Is this something that you thought would be nice to have, but no one actually cares about? Is this something that actually drives business decisions? And change control is a big one. A lot of the times it's super easy to add fields in production. But really what you want to do is you want to have some kind of change control management where you use a sandbox, do your stuff there, and then move it to production, right?
That makes sense. I know my previous experience also, I've seen many orgs that don't use description fields, or description field is basically the name of the field, like check mark to set proof of concept, and the description says proof of concept field, which adds absolutely no value. So having really useful description fields is something that can really help down the road, keeping your org tidy and understand what the process. So we've kept the org tidy, and we are going to benefit from it now. So can you walk us through the dashboard of a new org, or a cleaned up org, I should say?
Sure. So we're going to bring up the dashboard after we've made some changes. This is really going to focus around the replacement parts. So you'll see now that we've changed it, right? We no longer have replacement part 1, 2, and 3. What we did is we moved that stuff to an object, right? Because we can have a lot of replacement parts sent out. So it makes sense for that to be an object. And I need to be able to group that stuff by cases. So you'll see here, you can see cases with replacement parts by error. So I can see what the case count is, what the part number is, and what error code it's being sent out for, right? And if you look at the first one, like ADD1, I can go, why is, error code 570 getting that part? It shouldn't be getting that part. So you can find out real quick, hey, there's a problem here. I need to figure out what that is. And you can go in the report and you can look through and see what's going on, right? Account replacement parts sent. You can see if an account's getting a whole lot of replacement parts. You can have that jump up to the thing, right? This is a helpful dashboard for me because as a replacement parts manager, I can see maybe I need to check in on accounts, see what's going on, right? You can also see purchase locations parts sent. Maybe there's some kind of online retailer for some reason that they're buying stuff from that is breaking a lot more. What's going on with that? Are they shipping our stuff in horrible boxes? What's going on? You can also see just some other information, right? It's purchase product location by type, right? We can see, where that stuff's being purchased. Is it online, is it mail, or is it retail, right? So this was a pick list value, a pick list that we just cleaned up. A lot of the times people will put a lot of values in a pick list that don't really correspond. So I've seen, purchase location that says like online, mail order, retail, but then has Best Buy, Amazon, Costco, Walmart, which really aren't, like, those categories don't match up. That information is not useful. You need to break that stuff out. And then you can also see here, like we have the big one, replacement parts sent by case. So I can see if a case has been sent out a whole bunch of replacement parts, and we can flag those, and we can say, I can have the dashboard say anything that has 3 parts sent out within this time frame, I need to see, right? Before we couldn't do that because we had 3 fields we had to track. And if you know anything about, work, sometimes people don't fill out the first field. Maybe they fill out the second one because they're in a rush. Well, now that data's no good to me. Or they fill out the first one halfway, right? And then they fill out the second one all the way. So just making it really easy for the people to do, and also just thinking about what reports I need and changing those 3 fields to an object allows us to do so much more stuff that makes this dashboard useful. Now I want to go into Salesforce. I like this. This helps me do my job.
That was helpful.
And this is just 3 fields too. I mean, think about what you could do with, there's probably like 15, 20 fields that we could, and other orgs that we could probably tweak and make better.
That was great. Thank you, Jeremy. So I really appreciate that insight and walking us through that. So I think we're coming to now towards the closing up the presentation here, and we're looking for any questions. I know we had one early question that came aboard, which was, where do you get field footprint? Yeah, it's on the AppExchange. You'll have to actually Google search it to find it. So it is on the AppExchange though. but you won't find it directly in the AppExchange search.
And good news over here, you'll actually see this slide, which we're going to send out a recording early sometime next week for everyone who attended, and even if you weren't able to join us today. And you'll be able to see and get links to exactly some of the things that we spoke about, like field trip, like case flags, if you're looking to do better reporting and get a better insight in response times and maintaining those SLAs, as well as a nice help article for that new "Where is this used" button from Salesforce. And because we gave a shout out to our friends at OwnBackup, you can check out what they've got going on when you're looking at backing up your data.
I misspoke, actually. I apologize. So field trip is available on the AppExchange. Just search on it. I was thinking footprint. Sorry.
So we just have a question that just came in. Do you know where is this used will be generally available?
They haven't announced it officially yet. There are some speed or performance concerns they're trying to resolve. I think they're targeting it for the next 2 releases, but that's safe harbor, and I would refer to the documentation that we'll provide later on. But it's definitely out there, just there's some performance issues.
So keep the questions coming. We'll be hanging out here for the next 5 minutes or so for you. If you have any questions about anything that we talked about, further clarification, we're here for you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Jeremy, Mark, really helpful insight in getting ourselves spring cleaning, not just for our homes, sparking a little bit more joy. Thank you, Marie Kondo, for all the inspiration.
To get tidy.
To get nice and tidy.